Hello again, fellow Mystery Files. Today I'm covering some loose ends in the world of Ngaio Marsh and her gentleman detective, Roderick Alleyn. There is a continuation novel of sorts, some essays, some short stories, and a television script. So let's get started. There will be no spoilers in this video, but some of the essays I will talk about in full. They're not stories, so I don't really consider that spoilers, and they're very short anyway. But before I begin, make sure you like and subscribe to keep up to date with the channel. Let's start off with Money in the Morgue. This is a continuation novel of sorts. It was published in 2018, and technically, it's not technically a continuation novel because it was started by Ngaio Marsh, who abandoned the manuscript for reasons unknown, but I'll speculate in a few minutes. The book was finished by Stella Duffy, a New Zealand crime writer. And I found Money in the Morgue to be pretty good. I would say it's better than the Poirot continuation novels. It is set in the New Zealand during wartime, and we can speculate it takes place chronologically after Dyed in the Wool, but before Final Curtain. So it's Alan's last adventure in wartime New Zealand. Duffy writes that Marsh wrote the first three chapters and then left behind some notes, but those notes do not indicate a solution or even what the mystery was supposed to be. And I don't know if Duffy revamped the first three chapters or if an editor did or if they were left completely intact, but the transition between those first three and the rest of the book was seamless. I couldn't tell a different author wrote most of this book. And to be fair, I didn't compare Sophie Hannah to Agatha Christie, and I won't compare Stella Duffy to Ngaio Marsh, but Duffy does a much better job of emulating the original author's style. I could believe Niall Marsh wrote this book or wrote most of this book. Now, I don't think Niall Marsh's original story was the one Duffy wrote, but there are a few instances like here and there where I was like, I don't know if Niall Marsh would have gone there. I don't think she would have done that. But again, I'm not comparing the two. It's unfair to Stella Duffy, even though I have mostly positive things to say in that regard. The plot centers around a military slash civilian hospital in New Zealand where Alan is undercover pretending to be a sick patient. This is in line with the other wartime New Zealand books where Alan investigates some kind of like vague spy nonsense. We are in the thick of the war here, which is very unusual both for Marsh and her contemporaries, where the war always seemed to be like this distant event, even when it was ongoing. And what the mystery plot is a bit difficult to get into without spoiling, because there is a twist in the end here where you learn that nothing was as it seemed, and the mystery to be solved wasn't even the mystery you knew existed. It's a little convoluted. I mean, it's not like confusingly convoluted, but essentially what happens is a Mr. Glossop arrives at this military hospital in the middle of the night after his car breaks down. Glossop's job is to deliver the military payroll to various institutions in the area. He's very protective of his money, and as he's stuck in the hospital, he and the attending sister lock the money in the safe for safekeeping, and there's also other money stored there from other people who are in the area. An elderly civilian patient dies of natural causes, or believed to be natural causes, I should say, and shortly afterward, the money is stolen from the safe. A huge alarm breaks out, and Alan gets involved, and all the suspects start fighting with everyone, with each other, especially accusing the other of stealing the money and being like negligent with it. And Alan, he decides that the money has to be in the newly dead man's body bag because that's the only place it could be. So when he opens the body bag, the money is not in the body bag, and neither is the dead guy. There is a different dead person in the body bag, and that also appears. That body disappears shortly afterwards. And I really can't get much more into it because really the whole plot is kind of spoilery, but I think it's brilliantly executed. It reminded me a little bit of the Ellery Queen novel, The Greek Coffin Mystery, which also had Ellery like dig up a dead body in a coffin to look for a will. The will isn't there, and there's a different dead body in there. Very similar to that, even though the rest of the story plays out quite differently. If I were to include this on my Roderick Allen ranking, it probably lands near the middle of the list, maybe slightly below the middle, but still in that area of pretty good books. It's more thrillery. In fact, it's even advertised as an Allen adventure, more so than a traditional murder mystery, but it is a good one. It held my attention the entire time. The plot was thought out and well executed. There were some small issues I had, one of which involves a secret passageway, but it is foretold and it fits in with the setting, so I don't have too much of a problem with it. The novel has great continuity with other Allen novels. We don't have any of the other recurring characters, as that fits in with these era of books, but we do get Alan writing back home to Troy and Fox, and those conversations, or letters rather, were really a lot of fun, very fitting and very appropriate. I think the best thing about this book is its atmosphere. The twists in the story are great, but the setting is spectacular. Duffy and Marsh captured the wartime era perfectly, and this book takes place within just a couple of hours in the middle of the night, which is very rare here for a mystery novel. And there's a sense of isolation, not only physically, because this hospital is in the middle of a storm that's cut off the access to the road and the bridge, but also emotional isolation. Many of the characters miss home. They're not native New Zealanders, they're British people. And they miss their lives pre war. They long for better times. The time and place setting are used fantastically. I have not read other books by Stella Duffy, but Money in the Morgue made me want to pick up some of those books to see what she's all about. And I've been meaning to do that for some time now and have not done so. And I suspect Marsh also would have gone down this dark path with this book, and I think that's why she maybe abandoned it. Marsh was getting tired of these sort of like downer books infused with war. If you notice, her first few books post war are much jauntier than those of other authors who really play up the misery in England after World War II, while Marsh's are much happier and, quite frankly, out of touch, to be honest. This was the critics' take on Swing Brother Swing, for instance, which is a very happy-go-lucky book in the post-war England. Didn't fit the mood. But either that, or it's simply because the war ended and Ngaio Marsh simply wanted to move on to another project. But for anyone hesitant to read Money in the Morgue, my recommendation would be to go ahead and do so. It feels like a Ngaio Marsh novel, is very well written and executed. It is more thriller than mystery, however, but there is still a mystery, and I think it's absolutely worth the read. Moving on to those two essays, which are entitled Roderick Allen and Agatha Troy, respectively. And these are extremely short works about how Marsh created these characters. She wrote these around, in the late 1970s. As she mentions, her next book is Photo Finish. I enjoyed both of these. Marsh not so subtly created her one time characters off of people she knew, but here she explains that neither Alan nor Troy are based on real people. Alan she created to be more of a straight man detective. When Marsh first started writing, the literary detectives were these eccentric men like Poirot and Philo Vance, and she wanted to do something different. She explains that Agatha Troy is not named after Agatha Christie, like many people suspect, but she chose the name Agatha because it was so unlike a name girls were given during this time. She wanted to be different here. She describes how Alan really grew into his own, and you can tell Marsh views Alan as someone who exists off the page. She calls him her traveling companion, a friend, and they experience the same life things together. She explains the inspiration for Agatha Troy came when Marsh missed a boat at Fiji and wondered what was going on with that boat. And this is directly how Artisan Crime opens. She talked a lot about her editor and how her publisher didn't want her to marry Alan off to Troy, but she fought for it. In both of these very short essays, she managed to throw digs at Dorothy Sayers, which their rivalry was really something else. And there should be like a movie on this subject. Marsh claims that Sayers fell in love with Lord Peter Wimsey and ruined him. It'll never not be funny to me that this was still in Marsh's mind. She wrote these essays like 20 years after Dorothy Sayers were dead. And the final tidbit from these essays I want to talk about is capital punishment. Marsh hated capital punishment, and she expressed that view through Agatha Troy. And this is a point of contention in the Alan and Troy relationship. But then Marsh explains she learned from several London police officers that many in the field oppose capital punishment, and this came as quite a bit of surprise to her. So she incorporated that in her stories, and it would make sense if Alan also opposed capital punishment to fit in with this theme of the police officers and Niall Marsh's own belief. Moving on to some short stories, we have two groups of short stories, those with Alan and those without. I'll start with the ones with Alan, beginning with a Christmas short story, Death on the Air, not to be confused with the Christie novel Death in the Air. And I found this one to be middle of the road. I like the premise where a tyrannical father is murdered via electrocution, which is a murder method we don't see very often. Marsh gets a little technical with it, but not overly so. I actually think we have good character work with this one, which is somewhat rare for short stories. I think the mystery is good. I was a little bit let down by the way the story wraps up, but this is a common issue I have with short stories, as the author just doesn't have the room to do what they want. The ending felt rushed, but it was a good story otherwise. And Niall Marsh doesn't really have this problem in her other short stories, so for me here it was a bigger knock than it would be normally. The second short story is I Can Find My Way Out, which is an important one because it leads directly into the full length novel Opening Night, with many of the characters overlapping, and this story being mentioned a lot in the book. Alan and Troy are great in this one, but the star is Lord Michael Lamprey, who returns from Survey of Lampreys and is about to join the police force as he wanted to do in that novel. He pretends to be Alan and gets caught up backstage at a show's premiere when one of the actors either is murdered or committed suicide. I won't spoil, it is a point of debate. This is a fantastic short story with great characters and plot. It's extremely humorous despite its really dark nature. It doesn't fall into any of the other issues I think short stories sometimes do. I highly recommend, although I don't believe it is a must read before you read Opening Night. This is a very Niall Marsh-esque story being set in the theater, which she always does well. And the third and final Allen short story is my personal favorite, The Little Copplestone Mystery, which is a very domestic mystery. It takes place in a village where Alan and Troy spend their time, and we get a brief glimpse into their home life. Fox is also present, and what I love about this one is it almost feels like a full-length novel. We have the murder mystery, and we also have some like thriller-ish intrigue involving an old Bible and some vague clues. I don't want to go further than that, but The Little Copplestone Mystery felt so complete. It felt so satisfying. It held my interest the entire time. It had great characters, great plot, great setting. Sometimes I feel short stories are a lot of tell and no show, but that is not what's happening here. If you only read one of these short stories, I'd recommend you pick The Little Copplestone Mystery for sure, and it's not even really that close. Moving on to the non-Allen short stories, and these aren't all mysteries, but I still found them to be worth the read. The first of these is actually a true story called Hand in the Sand, about a family who finds a severed hand on the beach, which may or may not belong to a notorious missing persons case. Marsh wrote this story based on true events, and what makes this one stand out for me is that Marsh explains she wanted to use this as a plot for a novel, but the real life crime was at the time unsolved, and I believe it still is unsolved today. And Marsh didn't write that novel because she liked the idea of leaving the unknown alone instead of having to come up with her own solution. The second story is called Cupid's Mirror and takes place at a restaurant. A man tells his date about a murder he witnessed in the same restaurant through a mirror hanging on the wall. And I found this one to be a great story. It's honestly a little spooky, despite there not being like any like supernatural or horror elements to it. It's fantastic. Probably my favorite of the non-Allen stories in the collection. The third story is A Fool About Money, which is definitely not a crime story, but it's about a wife who is notoriously bad with money. It has a fun little twist, and what I love about this is the main character is so well depicted, and what amounts to about 8 to 10 pages of story. It's a comedy story and a very good one at that. It's definitely worth the read. The fourth story is probably my least favorite Niall Marsh short story, despite it being pretty good in terms of like execution, and that is Morepork. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly. It could be like Morepork, but it which is a name of a native New Zealand bird, also known as a ruru. And this one involves murder on a hiking slash camping expedition. And I just couldn't get into this one. There's nothing wrong with like the writing or the plot or even the ending. I think it's actually very well done, but for whatever reason, I just couldn't get into this one. And I'm not sure why. It is fairly long for a short story, and there are a lot of characters focused on. I think maybe that's it, where there's just too much going on in this short space, but it is a good story. Marsh always delivers on plot. and that is still the case here. And the final short story is called The Figure Quoted, which involves a man trying to auction off a large, think it's like a stone sink, and it's very large and unwieldy and very ugly, but he has to sell it. He's an auctioneer, so it's his job, and he's going to lose a lot of money if he doesn't. And this one does have some supernatural elements to it, but it's still a good read. It's still a fun read. I don't know if it's like the most exciting one out there, but still, I mean, if you're going to buy the short story collection, you might as well read it. And the final work I'm going to talk about in this video is one I probably would have saved for a different video, but it is included in the Ngaio Marsh collected short stories, so I'll talk about it here. And that is a TV script for a show called Crown Court, the episode named Evil Liver. And this was an episode of the 1970s British show Crown Court, which was a bit unusual. The show was a courtroom drama and scripted. However, the jurors were made up of audience members who had to determine a verdict. There was no script for the jury. It was solely their decision based on the events that unfolded before them. There was no predetermined outcome. Niall Marsh was one of many famous people who wrote an episode for this series, and the script is in the short story collection, but the episode is online, and I will provide a YouTube link to the episode in the description, and I'll pin the link in the comments. This episode was so much fun. It stars a pre-Miss Marple Joan Hickson as the defendant Miss Freebody, a crazy cat lady slash accused dog murderess, and her attorney is William Simons, who would afterward go on to play Niall Marsh's very own Inspector Fox in the Inspector Alleyn mysteries. The plot is fantastic. Miss Freebody is on trial for murdering her neighbor's dog by poisoning a delivery of liver. And there's an open question of maybe she meant to poison the neighbor, or maybe the dog, or maybe somebody else did it. The trial descends into just wild speculation and accusations. It's so much fun. Then there's another death in the courtroom, and it's really a wild ride. It's an hour long, and I recommend you watch it. The script comes with some speculation that is not in the episode about what Marsh wanted the solution to be. There isn't really a spoiler to say we don't have an actual resolution. Crown Court did not give the actual what really happened sort of thing. We do get a verdict, but these episodes never end with the concrete solution given. And this commentator lays out five possible solutions. Again, not spoilers here because we don't have an outcome, but he believes the murderer is actually the meat delivery boy for reasons that make sense, but his main reasoning is that Marsh typically used the least likely suspect as her killers, and he is the least likely suspect. I disagree, first of all, that Marsh used the least likely suspect often. She actually used the most obvious suspect quite a bit and obfuscated through other means. But one option that doesn't come up in the commentary is that the death in the courtroom could be a suicide, and I'll just leave it at that. That's what my opinion is. But this episode is absolutely worth the hour of your time. There's a link in the description and the comments, so check it out. And that's it for this video. There are a few other Niall Marsh short stories that weren't collected that I may cover in the future. She wrote a number of plays as well that I can cover, although to be honest, I'm not familiar with any of them, and I'm not sure where they are available to read, if at all, or maybe I can review a performance somewhere. I have not really looked into that too much, but next week the video will come out on Christmas Day. So in celebration, I will be discussing Hercule Poirot's Christmas, my favorite Christie novel, in full. This is my first video dedicated solely to one novel, and I will split the video into non-spoiler and spoiler sections. I've wanted to do videos on individual works for some time, and figured I would do them when it was like seasonably appropriate or on special anniversaries. 2023 is the 100th anniversary of both Murder on the Links and Whose Body, and I wanted to do videos on those books celebrating the centennial, but I just didn't get around to it in time. But maybe in the future on some 101st anniversary, maybe. I'm not sure, but there'll be other books to cover as well. So before I log off, make sure you like and subscribe to keep up to date with the channel. Until next time, Mystery Files.